Institute earlier this year. Thank you. I'm going to get to the recording piece in just a moment, but I joined the Impact Relations Institute earlier this year, leading marketing and communications, and the group that puts out everything that you see across our social channels. And I've been so thrilled to join this community. Just a little bit of background for those of you who don't know about the Impact Relations Institute. It was founded by Melissa Orozco. Making sure I say that name right. Melissa, did I do a good job? Thumbs up on that one?
There was a founding board, me and several others.
And since then, this organization has come together. We have over 1,200 community members. 12,000 is the North Star we're working towards. 1,200 community members who are really committed to using responsible marketing and communications to drive positive social good. And so we come together on a monthly basis in these councils to talk to different experts across the marketing and communications world and hear from them about tools, resources, programs, case studies to help us educate ourselves a bit more. So a couple of housekeeping items for today. As you just heard, this is being recorded. Hopefully that's not an issue. If it is an issue, you can either hop off or send Jenna a quick private message and we'll talk about it. It will be available online on our YouTube channel. This is a 1-hour conversation that we're going to facilitate. As I mentioned, we're featuring experts to talk about trends and best practices. Today, we're going to be focusing on the future of ESG, and we have a fantastic speaker who I'm going to introduce in just a minute. And yeah, I will say that drop questions into the chat as we move along. If it's relevant in the moment, we'll try to get to it. Otherwise, you can also drop it in the chat. We're going to have 15 minutes at the end to have a bit more of a conversation, and we'll bring up any questions from there. And let me just see if I've gotten everything. A few other things. One other thing, please practice yes and communications. This is really about an open community. We want this to be an open dialogue. This is really about ensuring all voices across the spectrum are heard. So if you disagree, that's fair, and we're open to different opinions, but make sure it's really productive conversation. Please mute yourselves if you haven't. I think I see a lot of little red microphones. And if you'd like to continue the conversation with anyone afterwards, feel free to reach out. We can set up conversations with Michael or anyone on the ULU or Impact Relations team. And then finally, please follow us on all our social medias, Twitter, Instagram, and most importantly, check out the pledge on our website. Learn what it's about. If you haven't, take the pledge or come to us and talk about how you're feeling about taking the pledge. We're always happy to have those conversations. Jenna, thumbs up. Did I cover all my housekeeping items? Wonderful. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce Michael Maslansky. Michael and I met, oh gosh, maybe about 3 years ago, and I was instantly impressed with his incredible language strategy firm. He used the motto, I'm going to quote you so I don't get this wrong, but also tell me if I get it wrong. It's not what you say, it's what people hear. And this has really stuck with me. It's really all about how we're communicating, and not just the intent, but also how people are conceiving and perceiving the information. And so today we are talking about ESG. And as a reminder, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, and the investing that has been making headlines lately. I have certainly learned a lot about this in my past years in my career, but it's become a very hot topic. And we have some thoughts specifically around the language of ESG, which we're going to dig into today. So Michael joins us from his firm, Maslansky and Partners. I also encourage you to check them out on social media, their website. And I've recently discovered Michael's podcast. So definitely take a listen. And Michael has a book out as well, which Michael, I'll let you plug in just a second, which I have been listening to. Great, 2 more. So just checking my checklist. I think that's it. And let's get started. I actually want to just set the stage for the conversation today by handing it over to one of our founders, Melissa, to talk a little bit about the history of ESG, just make sure we're all talking about ESG in the same way, and to just bring us up to speed on sort of what's happened the past few months/years that have brought us to the point we're going to be discussing.
Thank you, Jen. Everyone hear me okay? Lovely. Okay, so yes, as Jen mentioned, I'm going to give a little bit of the lay of the land of how this topic became so controversial. It actually started back in March. That's when it really became a political lightning rod, if you will, when President Joe Biden issued his first legislative veto in his presidency in defense of ESG. Again, ESG standing for the E is for environmental policies and priorities. So this is such as reducing carbon emissions. The S is for social factors like being improving your diversity in your workplace, making sure that your labor rights are upheld. And then the G is for good governance, ensuring that your governing board isn't also, there to benefit from all the profits of the company, making sure that there's governance there. All of this was created initially in 2004, but it didn't really pick up steam until the 2008 financial crisis, when America and the general public lost its faith and trust in the financial system and in Wall Street. Banks were getting, the big banks were bailed out. People weren't going to jail for any involvement in the crisis. And there was just a lot of distrust. And so there was a big sense of betrayal. And in the wake of this, Wall Street really felt like it needed a rebrand. It started with CSR and a little bit of DEI. And then ESG was really what came to the surface and became an umbrella term that embodied all of the elements of the pillars that were important to make sure that this wouldn't happen again. And those proponents, essentially, the argument that it makes is that you can do good for the world by also do good for business. And some examples of this is, I'll save examples for the chit chat because I want to get to Michael's breakdown of this. But let me see, I have some notes of other things I wanted to cover. That kind of just brings us to the wake of it. So one of the main things that kind of brought us to the recent doubts and why this has become such a lightning bolt conversation is that in March, when Biden issued that veto, there was a state bill that was signed saying that that Texas needed to have a full stop of doing business with banks that were supporting ESG. They felt like the big banks like BlackRock was boycotting fossil fuels, and that wasn't the case. But there was a language war, as Michael can appreciate. It was all about what people were hearing, and what people were hearing was boycott. And so what ended up happening was some Republicans and some senators and some speakers of the House passed a bill that would prevent people investing retirement funds on behalf of federal workers from considering ESG factors into making investment decisions. And that was when Joe Biden vetoed this bill. So that kind of brings us to the spring when it became a political issue. And then now we have today. So the elections are coming up. It's now a big topic again. And a lot of people are just questioning, there's of course going to be critics. Now, ESG is a framework. It is not, there's not a governing body that oversees this. What you will see is there's some rating bodies. So like JP Morgan, I'm not sure if BlackRock does it, but Thomson Reuters, they issue these rating reports every year that give companies ESG ratings. Now, they're not the governing body of this either, but they can see, okay, this company is doing all of the sustainable stuff. Now, where some of the doubts and consumer doubts is like Tesla is an environmental company. They get sustainability points. But would somebody say that Tesla has been a case study or a shining example of strong governance? No, somebody could argue that it hasn't been. McDonald's can also be found in sustainability funds, and people could see the efforts that McDonald's is making on the sustainability front, that everything that they're doing is trying to be compostable, et cetera. But there's a lot of doubt about that too. So again, that's where a lot of the controversy comes from. But the biggest controversy comes from the big banks, the lobbyists, and it kind of comes down to a little bit of an ego battle, saying like, we don't want the government telling us how to prioritize our business. And for the longest time, it was the Republicans and the GOP that were representative of big business. And what it looks like now, because so many businesses have a strong ESG commitment and have strong ESG pillars and standards, and they are very vocal about it, there's a concern that this is now becoming big business is looking very different, and it's about soft business. And so that's going to be a big topic. That's going to be a big debate coming up, saying like, this is not going to be good for the American economy. This is not going to be good for the global economy for all of these reasons. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background, how we got here. Michael, if there's anything that I missed, feel free to jump in and fill in some of those blanks. But I just thought that everyone might benefit from that as a precursor.
That was great. Thank you, Melissa. Michael, I would love to just jump right into that, if that's all right with you. Maybe we'll do your intro at the back now, because I feel like we're already on a rhythm, but I would like to know if there are any other forces over the past few years that you saw, just to add to what Melissa shared, that you think have really sort of put us where we are today.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, as Melissa described, we've seen an evolution from shareholder capitalism, where there was the primacy of the shareholder. Basically, companies were expected to focus on the bottom line, to a shift to stakeholder capitalism. In 2019, the Business Roundtable kind of changed the purpose of the corporation to reflect the responsibility to communities beyond the shareholder and include employees, local communities, the broader environment, but other stakeholders. And that was, I think, largely a response, as Melissa said, to the financial crisis, but also a general move that we've all seen in public data and in companies, that you've got more consumers and certainly more employees that have different expectations of companies, or said that they had different expectations of companies in terms of a purpose beyond selling products, what they do with the environment, what they do on social issues. I think what also really kind of changed things was in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, was a sense that companies really had to take stronger positions on DEI and make progress there. And in some ways, that was both the trigger for a lot of movement on DEI, but also a lot of the anti-woke backlash that started in Florida with Ron DeSantis and the fight against critical race theory in the classroom, and then more to the corporate space. And I think what we're seeing from a corporate perspective is that you had companies that saw a tremendous amount of potential upside from being out in the forefront on ESG issues. And they were, it was everything from Nike and Colin Kaepernick and taking a knee to other brands that said, you know what, if we go out there and we take a strong position, then we're going to get rewarded by customers who want to see companies with a purpose. All of a sudden, in the wake of this anti-woke backlash, there was a question of like, whoa, wait, we could actually have our reputation severely damaged. Bud Light being the obvious example of that, where they lost, I think it was 15% of their market share because of an act that was done presumably, or at least partly, in service of ESG. And so, so now you've got companies that really don't know what to do. A lot of our clients, the reason why we're here, the reason why we did this piece of work, is because we've got a lot of clients who have made commitments on the environment or on social justice. They don't know whether to walk back those commitments. They don't know whether to keep moving forward and risk controversy. Or what a lot of them are doing is they're sitting still and they're kind of hoping that they get a signal that it's safe to come out again and do things. And what we've been trying to do is to help separate really the wheat from the chaff. What is controversial from what is not, so that companies can move forward with confidence and do what they want. And I just feel like, on a total tangent, Jen, I'd be remiss in saying that when you and I met 3 years ago, we were pitching for business, which we did not win. And, we're still...
Thank you for calling that out in front of everyone. That is true. But you left such an impression on me that here we are today, which is arguably more important than the business of the past 3 years. Yeah. Michael, can you just talk a little bit about the letters themselves and the words themselves? I mean, as a language strategist, what has happened in what you described as potential incredible upside, and obviously the anti-woke sentiment, but how have the letters ESG and the words sort of fallen victim to progress in this space?
So I think, we all talk about the fact that words matter, and in our world, we really believe that if you frame the language, if you decide what language is going to be used in a debate, then you win the debate in so many cases. And in this case, the fact that Melissa, with this group of communicators, felt like it was important, and I think it probably was, to articulate what the E, the S, and the G stands for is one of the fatal flaws of the term.
Yep.
So acronyms are bad vehicles for communications, and empty terms make easy targets. And the first thing that we saw in the research that we've done, not terribly surprising, but important, is that only about half the population is familiar with the term ESG. Only about 20% of the population has a favorable opinion of it. Only about 10% really knows enough about it to kind of have a strong opinion about it in either direction. And when you ask people what it stands for in an open-ended way, one of the most common reactions we got was that it stands for eggs, sausage, and grits. And so, when you've got a term that is not obvious on its face what ESG is, it's easy to demonize. And that's what the right has done in this case. They've been able to put radical in front of ESG or ideology after ESG and easily demonize the term. And what we find as we look at political debates of the past is that when you have a term that has been demonized, that has been equated with something negative, it is very hard to kind of regain the high ground. These things don't turn around. And so, for better or worse, without making a judgment on the merits, just from a linguistic perspective, we've got a term here that is, it is now politically coded language, and will make the debate more political the more that we continue to use the term.
Okay, I just have a couple things to say on that, if I could jump in, Jen, before your next question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I know that you saying like acronyms are dangerous because people don't know what they mean and they can get lost in it. But I don't think you could name a single public traded company that doesn't know what it means. And what matters is that the companies that are in the public market that are running our business economy, that they have someone committed to these ESG standards, and they all have ESG governing bodies. And so it's not very important if, Joe Schmo doesn't know what ESG is. What's important is that the people that are in the positions to govern ESG policies for these big corporations that are running the economy, that are running society and anything that's going to advance in our renewable transition, et cetera, like that they know what they mean and that they have a framework to abide by. Because if environmental, social, and governance is removed, and sorry, just for the awareness of everybody here, I'm wearing the hat of making an argument for keeping ESG in case that is very, very clear. because there's just so much progress that has been made in ESG. So I think, yes, language is important, and finding terms that aren't going to be polarizing is very important, but it is very dangerous, I believe, to remove that framework from all of these publicly traded companies who it is helping them perform better.
So I appreciate all of that, and I think it's a worthwhile debate to have. I think the question really is, how do we clarify what it is that we're focused on here? So first of all, ESG was created to be an internal, like it was a framework for evaluating a range of different criteria that in some cases were considered non-financial, which I think is a terrible term for another set of reasons. And it has been used as a scorecard for investors to evaluate these criteria and presumably make judgments from an investment perspective, from a business perspective. And in many ways, ESG as a category has gotten away from that. Like the reality is that ESG has been used by those same corporations to mean a whole lot more than to be a scorecard. Everything that companies do under the guise of corporate social responsibility or philanthropy or diversity has now also been embedded under this term. And the problem is that it's now been politicized. I think, Melissa, the thing that I would violently disagree with philosophically from what you said is that it doesn't matter what Joe Schmo thinks, because over the next 12 months, 13 months, ESG is going to become the center of a major political debate leading up to an incredibly important election. And if companies use it internally, and then they put it on the name of their report or they put it on their website, they are creating opportunities to become a target in the middle of this political debate. And companies are risk averse. And so all of our clients are debating, like, what do you say about this? It is possible to have two things be true at the same time, that the ESG scorecards that portfolio managers use to evaluate different companies and make decisions on where they fit in their portfolio can still have a column for E, a column for S, and a column for G. And that scorecard can be called something different.
Right.
And I think that is where we want to be. Like the buckets are fine, although there are a lot of people who disagree with the buckets because it's environmental, social, and it should be E again for everything else. But it is there is now a big industry around ESG. There are going to be places where it's appropriate, but everything internal, particularly on debates like this, becomes public. And there's a reason why McDonald's took ESG off their website, why Larry Fink said he won't use the term.
He excluded it from his language,
it's because you don't want to be in the middle of political debates that you don't want to be in the middle of.
Right.
If you want to pick a fight, it's one thing, but if you don't, you're going to try and find the language that is the least likely to get you in hot water.
So, Michael, okay, go ahead, Maslan.
To the point of it doesn't matter who knows what ESG is. I think the point I'm trying to make there is that swings both ways. So yes, there's going to be people on the left that hear that they either consider it radical or don't understand what it means and don't have a response to it, or their response is just confusing and they make something up and then it becomes a game of telephone. Sure. But it also swings the other way. So like people on the left, they're going to hear it, they're going to vote, they're going to invest in companies that do that. I think that's the greater fear by the Republican Party saying, okay, all of big business has become representative of this ESG framework that all of these organizations are now trying to abide by and prioritize. And this is in a way shifting business ideals in a direction that don't agree with my personal beliefs. And so again, yes, it's having an impression on the general public on both sides. My point is, what is important, whether it's understood as an acronym or not, is that the people with it, is that every organization, they understand what it is and that they're setting priorities to try to adhere to that. So I think what I'd like to sort of move on to is, if there's alternative language, is there accountability attached to that alternative language? Is there frameworks that are being suggested to keep companies accountable? And again, these frameworks aren't perfect. There's McDonald's in sustainability funds, and that is confusing to a lot of people, and they can poke holes. But largely speaking, this is causing organizations to perform better and to be more responsible businesses. So is there frameworks behind this alternative language being proposed?
So again, to be clear about what I am suggesting, it is that when it comes to ESG, the thing that is controversial or most controversial is the way that the issue has been framed and articulated, the language that's being used.
Yeah.
And we don't need to get away from a scorecard on the back end that has environmental criteria, social criteria, and governance criteria. In fact, I'm not sure that the scorecards need to change a whole lot, but how we talk about them, how we package them does. And actually, I would say that the elements on a scorecard, there are different things that are going to generate more positive reactions and negative reactions. And I'll just say one other thing about the companies and the people that are doing this. They have stakeholders that are inside their organizations as well. And there are plenty of organizations that have both conservative and progressive constituents within the organization. And if you are using politically coded terminology that moralizes in a lot of ways, and I'll talk about that in a second, then you are alienating potentially half of your employee population. as well as a significant percentage of your customer population. And so if you can avoid that by changing the way that you talk about it, why wouldn't you? And so the framework can stay, but what we call it should change, in my mind.
So
Do you think
you're
if we
actually
call it
talking.
something else, the framework will still be there?
Yeah, framework is, we're not suggesting, for the most part, there's nothing in the data that suggests that companies shouldn't keep doing many of the things that they're doing. How they talk about it should change.
I would love to actually get into that, because you're talking to a group of communicators and marketers. And I think sort of knowing what you found in the research you conducted around what should we be saying? I think a lot of us believe in the progress that ESG makes and the potentially really positive outcomes. So how can we do it? How can we take it back to our companies, our organizations, our lives to continue to make these efforts, but not be part of the debate and to demonstrate really the good we're doing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think, the place that I will start is a recognition that in most organizations, there is not a homogeneous belief in the same set of values, right? You have conservatives and you have Republicans. You have people who are, there are conservatives and there are progressives. There are Democrats, there are Republicans, there are people in the middle. And one of the biggest problems with, in addition to being an empty term, another problem with the language around ESG is that it assumes that we all share the same set of values. It is very moral. It says that there is only one right thing to do, and it is the progressive right thing to do. That there is only one way to make a positive impact society, and it's the progressive way of approaching things. Now, even if you believe that's true, that doesn't mean that you should say it if you're talking to a group of people that may not share your values.
Right.
There are ways to move this beyond a purely kind of values-driven, moralizing message to accomplish the goal more effectively. And to me, it all comes back to, what are we trying to achieve? If we can achieve the goal more effectively, and we can remain accurate, but we can use language that takes the temperature down, we should do that. So the first kind of language shift that we would recommend is a shift from ESG to a focus on responsible business. And I see that somebody mentioned that in the chat. The interesting thing about this term, responsible business, when we ask people about it, is when we ask people, what is a responsible business? They describe all the elements of ESG. A company that takes care of their employees, that cares about the environment, that invests in local communities, that is managed well. They describe it, but what they don't say is they don't make it political when it's about a responsible business. And while we may disagree on what is the right thing to do, it is kind of less. I think certainly we didn't hear any of the instinctive polarization of people saying, well, what's right for you is not right for me when it comes to responsibility. People don't say, well, that's responsible to me, but it's going to be irresponsible to you. There's like a much closer connection. So when you start thinking about the language of responsible business, first of all, if it's two words, it is at least somewhat less likely to be turned into an acronym than 3 letters. And when you hear responsible business, you are likely to have positive associations and the right kind of associations. And so it kind of wins from a linguistic perspective. And then it's not just the high level message that we think needs to evolve. It is thinking about the entire kind of lexicon and approach that we use to talking about the different actions that we'll take. And there are really 3 areas that I think the current language gets us in trouble. We call it kind of a shift to real brand value. And real is about using language that is understandable and tangible to the average person.
Yep.
If you think about the idea of managing human capital, which is probably on an ESG scorecard, versus taking care of employees, they arguably connote very close to, if not exactly the same thing. But I think you should talk about taking care of employees, because everybody understands what it is that you're trying to achieve. If you talk about, scope 3 emissions versus all of the emissions, that impact, or the emissions created by customers, like, why don't we use plain language that doesn't have a political connotation to it? Because there's one other aspect that I'll just touch on briefly, and that is that some political commentators out there, and I happen to agree with them, say that the battle that's being waged right now, it's less about right versus left. It is more about elite versus everybody else. And that what a lot of conservatives are rebelling against is the sense that there are these elites who are dictating what is going on. And the way that elites tend to position themselves as exclusionary is they come up with language that only they can understand. And so let's create language that everybody understands, not make it sound like we are trying to be elitist, whether or not we are, and let everybody in on the benefits of focusing on environmental sustainability, on treating everybody equally, and on managing our businesses well, and we'll be much better off.
Yeah. I think the word responsible is really interesting. The fact that Patagonia is already using it, per someone in the chat, means that it's already sort of probably in the lexicon of words that brands that people respect and admire will pick up on. It was actually the word responsible was a topic of a conversation across the Impact Relations Board recently. And it certainly removes, what I found interesting was that it removes the morality to it. And it was much easier to digest. So that was really interesting. I'm going to go off book here because I just want to ask about sort of the spreading of a new word and how that could work. If ESG in all of its issues is accepted, how quickly can new words spread? And will it be seen as a mask to what the problem really is?
Well, so I think one thing that's an important context here is that there is no formal definition of ESG. There is nobody who owns the term ESG. There's a lot of inconsistency in how ESG is used. Same with sustainability, same with corporate social responsibility, same with corporate responsibility. All of these terms have grown up organically. They've been adopted by some. They've been used in different ways. We did work for an asset manager on sustainable investing. And even if we've done a lot of work in that space, but just this one, they use ESG for integration, like for their scorecarding, but they use sustainable investing, but they've also got responsible investing, but they've also got impact investing. It's like there are right now 1 million terms in this space. And so in some ways that makes it easier for a new term to emerge. I think the incentives for a new term are that companies want to talk about this stuff and they don't want to get the shit kicked out of them. And that if there is a term that offers the promise of letting them take advantage of the opportunity that comes with talking about these issues and minimizes or mitigates the risk that goes along with it, that's a pretty good incentive to start moving in this direction. I mean, the initial feedback that we've gotten, the kind of the most obvious areas is that places or companies that are still using corporate social responsibility are now moving to maybe just remove the social, because social in and of itself is a politically coded term. And again, like, just to be clear, one of the things that I talk about a lot when it comes to language is that some messages make us feel good and some messages work. And they're usually not the same thing. And we can get pissed off and annoyed that people don't like the language that we like or don't agree with us on certain values and beliefs. I care about results. And I just want to find the path of least resistance to achieving the goals that I want or my clients want. And I don't want language to get in the way. I want it to help. And so if, as I think it is here, getting in the way, how do we clear that out and make it easier? And somebody I know mentioned actions in here. I actually think that the riskier it is to talk about this stuff, first of all, if they do stuff and they can't talk about it and try and get credit for it, then they're much less likely to do it, right? Unless they're being pushed.
How does a company get credit for responsible business?
Well, they might put out a responsible business report, just as they did an ESG report. They might talk about their actions in the same way. I am talking about what is fundamentally a change in language, not substance. And people will say, well, it's just semantics. Like semantics is the whole ball game here.
Like the biggest thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
One of the biggest issues with CSR, corporate social responsibility, was that it became this offsetting play where they cut a check to charity to offset, carbon emissions that they were putting out into the universe, whatever it was. Like, there's not that framework in place. So if it's responsible business and they're issuing a responsible business report, could it possibly get ambiguous again? Because there's, and I know you're not saying, you're not suggesting that the framework be removed. My concern with the language specifying the framework being removed is that it does become ambiguous, so that people can kind of make up what responsible business means. And for a lot of people on the right, responsible business means maximizing returns. And then it kind of goes, you take a step back.
I don't agree. I mean, we could debate that, but and ask people what they think. I don't think that that's true. And I think the notion that ESG right now is not ambiguous. Mm-hmm. Like, you can pick your scorecard. You can, you got a lot of flexibility on your materiality assessments. Like, ESG is ambiguous. May not be as ambiguous as CSR was, mm-hmm. but it is. And so
it's definitely not perfect.
Right. And so nothing's going to be perfect. The point here is, why are we holding on to this term that now has clear downsides? Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not sure what the upsides are going to be when companies start to be more and more afraid about putting out a report that says it's an ESG report. They may report out on it still, but it just becomes much more politically hazardous.
So it's associated with woke capitalism, and it's not hard to become an ethical capitalist, but it is hard to be an ethical capitalist that outperforms an unethical capitalist. And that's kind of been the case for a long time. But it's changing. And I think that is the part that kind of sets a risk or a threat, is that possibly this ethical capitalist ideal can outperform the fossil fuel, the traditional capitalist ideals. And that's money out of their pocket. That's leaving money on the table. So it's become political in that regard. But do you think that the anti-woke capitalist war is this kind of shushing it? Is it kind of saying, is it kind of telling ESG to go away, and it's giving points back to the other end? Like, how do you think this is going to level the political playing field, not just calm language and create least resistance?
So again, I think I will, if we look at what the data says, I won't give my opinion. If we look at what the data says right now, you've got a conservative population in America, mm-hmm. where 90% of Republicans believe that companies are forcing morals down their throats. 90% of Republicans. Okay? Yeah. So we can disagree with Republicans all we want. They still make up a significant percentage of the population, and they still feel like the way that a lot of companies talk about a lot of issues is moral and values oriented and disrespectful of their opinions. And that's not a way to win. The way to win is to, there are a lot of things that they agree with a whole lot more than what they think that they agree with. And part of it is because the conservative media is demonizing these things, but part of it is because we tested a narrative where we were using companies' own language to communicate progressive values on ESG. Generates incredible amounts of agreement from progressives. It generates incredible amount of disagreement from conservatives. companies are not in the business of alienating half of the population. And so why can't we just find a way forward that lets them see Republicans want environmental sustainability. They want companies to take care of their employees. Right now, the language is getting in the way of it. And so again, like I think we have to remove it. And Jen, I know you were going to jump in with a question.
Yeah, but I actually have another one. I just wanted to ask about everyone's favorite topic of Gen Z. And if this, as we think about the future, and we think about the future of politics and the future of voters and business leaders, if you see a difference of opinion or reactions by generation, and if you think, you know, we need to be anticipating how they'll react or how they'll come together or not.
So I don't want to draw any kind of overly large conclusions about this group on the call here, but if we're talking about Gen Z on the coasts working for companies that are, you know, in largely progressive markets, then yes, you've got a deeply progressive set of views among Gen Z. If you look across the country at Gen Z and you nationalize the results by age cohort, you see much less difference than, you know, with other age groups. Like, yes, there are more members of Gen Z who are more progressive than other age groups, as there always is. As you look from young to old, older people are always more conservative, but it is not wildly so. And so, you know, if we say like the arc of history is leaning towards progressive values, I think that that's true. I think what we need to recognize, however, is that there's still plenty of people at all levels that don't agree with those things. And there are more and more of them that get pushed in that direction, the more that they are made to feel bad for having views that are outside of the progressive kind of mainstream.
Yeah. We have 1 minute before I want to sort of open up Q&A, and I can tell the chat is on fire, so there's going to be a lot of Q&A. So I actually have just one last question, and it's really just knowing the audience we have here today, which is around what advice do you have? Obviously, there's a variety of levels and types of marketers and communicators in the audience here today, but I was wondering if you could give general advice, and I'll plug for you if you have more specific advice, call Michael, he'll help you, but what can we take away and how can we bring this back to our organizations and brands to communicate?
Yeah, so I think, again, if we stay focused on the goal, we've got certain things that companies, our clients or companies that we work for want to achieve. In this case, why we want to achieve them can actually be damaging, as opposed to talking about reducing emissions, talking about protecting local communities, talking about taking care of employees. Like, we don't need to explain why as we do what. If any of you have seen Apple's sustainability video, they do a really good job of talking about what they've done. They actually spend most of their time on the what, they spend a lot less on the why. Okay, you don't want to make enemies out of the people that you are selling to or that are working for you. And so we use plain language. We make sure that the actions that we're taking are connected to our brand. They are seen as authentic by our audience. And we say authenticity is actually in the eye of the beholder. Bud Light was a colossal disaster, mostly because the public didn't think that Dylan Mulvaney was a Bud Light customer. And so it felt like it was just far afield from the brand. So we connect the actions that we take to our brand. And the third is that we talk about value, not values. What's in it for the business? Okay, the business can care about and have a responsibility to multiple stakeholders, but it should be clear that that is good for business, right? Like, taking care of my employees is good for business. Taking care of the local communities where I operate is good for business. Taking care of the environment that we are a part of is good for business. And the more that we can connect what it is that we're doing to business, even if we've got other reasons for doing it, the better off, the safer, the more effective that we will be.
Great. That's great advice. I was thinking how to bring that back to my manager and say, here's how we're going to move forward. So a couple of questions from the audience and team, feel free to jump in and put more questions in, but just a few that have come through. So the first was actually around CSR language and how people are currently reacting to that. We obviously saw a shift and a movement away from that as ESG evolved. But do you think it's something to reconsider? Do you think it was ambiguous? It still is ambiguous. What research have you seen on that?
So I don't know how much, we have some data from what we've done, but I think generally, if you think about CSR, it probably had the same level of awareness as ESG does, meaning that most people don't know what it is. I think the word social is going to be the most challenging word in that term. And so corporate responsibility is going to do better with the broader public. And again, it's a place where there are people who live and work in the community. The language that you use in the community gives you a sense of identity and purpose, shared kind of values. And so it's tough to give up that language. But every major debate these days ends up being in the kind of the public domain. Mm-hmm. And so we should choose the language that's most effective. So I think corporate responsibility is a safe place to play, whereas corporate social responsibility, first of all, it often becomes CSR, and so people are much less likely to understand it. And it just runs the risk of creating negative associations that you don't need.
Great, thank you. Another question from Brad, Impact Relations Zone. From an employee perspective, we hear more and more about candidates wanting to join organizations that business values align with their own personal values. How can we make this appeal while not polarizing candidates or customers? And I'll add, or shareholders.
Yeah, so I think the more that we make the language human, the easier it is to do. So I'll even take, DE&I, and aside from the fact that, again, the acronym is something that people won't know, but if you start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, by design, diversity, equity, inclusion now has a whole universe of meaning that is embedded in it. For most people, I believe, and I think we've seen data to this effect, what they want is to operate in a company that respects who they are as people, that includes them, that takes care of them, and that customers may want to do business with companies that seem to have an employee base that reflects who they are as people. This is a much more human way of talking about this term. It removes the jargon and the politicized language. And so the way that I would approach it is I would try to stay away from all of this jargon. And I would talk about what it is that you stand for in plain language, what it is that you're doing in plain language. I mean, we do know that the closer that things connect to business, the more people see, the more often that more people see it as an appropriate place for business. And so if I say that, that we want to make sure that we have a diverse employee base because we have a diverse customer base. Even conservatives agree that makes sense. It's appropriate, it's supported, and so it really is just kind of bringing it down to that simple, plain spoken level.
Yeah. Even hearing you describe it, it feels right. Feels good.
Jen, can I just say one thing?
Yes, please go ahead.
First off, Michael, thank you. That was extremely helpful. The shortest plug I could possibly give, if you are a brand, a nonprofit, or an agency member, bring in the Maslansky and Partners team. I'm telling you, language matters. I had the good fortune working with Michael's team in a previous career, and I will tell you, every time we brought in Maslansky and Partners, the dynamics of the engagement changes because you start to see truly how words resonate with the audience. It is something to see. It's spectacular. So that's all I want to say there.
I love that plug, Brad. That's exactly right. I think we have time for one or two more questions. One popped up that I thought was really interesting around this trend outside the US. We tend to sort of focus on North America. And obviously the politics take up a lot of media in North America, but was wondering if you were seeing similar sentiment or if you have research beyond our borders.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say it's definitely US centric. I think we're seeing it a bit in the UK, but I think it is following a lot of the kind of polarization of politics. It is natural that this will follow. So right now, obviously, there's much stronger support for ESG in Europe than there is any place else in the world. I think that will likely continue, and it is a good argument that it may take longer to move away from the term in those markets than it does in the US. That being said, I think the same political dynamics that have played out in the US are now playing out more and more in Europe. And this is going to be, I think, similarly a victim, even though it's, Europe kind of operates further ahead on the curve on environmental and social issues in general.
Yeah, that I'll tell you from my experience working at global organizations, that's one of the hardest parts is reconciling the different regions and the speed at which they're moving and having a global position, but ensuring you're bringing all of your employees along and of course all of your customers along. We have 7 minutes left. I have a couple of housekeeping things, but I do have one final question because we didn't get to it in the beginning. On your website, it says to make sure we ask you about MAS 1.0, and I want to know what that is and what we should ask you about it.
Well, so I had a partner a long time ago who had set the tone for the culture. It was a rough and tumble culture. I think Brad knows who I'm talking about, and I was let's say less evolved than I am. I went through a 360 process, got tremendous feedback, painful feedback from my team, and made some changes. And that was the nickname that was given to me was MAS 2.0, in contrast to MAS 1.0 that had come before. So.
Is that what we should be calling you, is Maz instead of Michael?
Maz is, yes, that's what I
okay.
And I hope affectionately referred to, at least within my team and more broadly.
Well, we're happy to have MAS 2.0 today. Although I would like to redo this with MAS 1.0 and just see what happens, see how rowdy it gets in this group. I will pause with Brad.
I also just want to jump in real quick, Jen.
Yeah, of course.
For being such a good sport and letting me challenge these thoughts and this language. There's a lot of ESG proponents on this line and that will be listening. And I wanted to make sure that their thoughts, concerns, and ideals were sort of expressed too in this conversation. So thanks for fielding all of those questions. I think you gave us some good responses and good things to consider. Absolutely.
I think this type of productive conversation, even with differing opinions, is what's going to actually progress us more and more, and making sure everyone is brought along as opposed to just talking to ourselves over and over again. So I think this has been really awesome. We got to so many great questions, but there was obviously a lot left in the chat. So I would encourage everyone to reach out to Michael, maybe not all at once, but we can drop his website into the chat. Reach out. As Brad said, hire him for everything, or at least talk to him to see how he can help, because he is brilliant. Regretting the mistake my organization made a couple years ago. And if there's anyone else you want to speak to who you saw on the line today, or if you want to chat with Melissa, again, feel free to contact us. We'll send a follow-up survey. Please take it. We also are always open and welcome to other topics you want to hear about. I feel like maybe there's an ESG MAS 2.0 conversation to be had here. So maybe we'll pick this back up as we get closer to elections next year. And as a final reminder, please subscribe to the Impact Relations Agenda, which is a newsletter we send out that will cover some of these topics. Follow us on all of the social channels so that we can continue the conversations. And I think those are all my housekeeping closures. Jenna, thumbs up. Did I get it all? Okay, awesome.
Jen, thank you both for those questions.
We'll be circulating a recording after the fact, so please feel free to share it with others, and stay tuned for more on our next Impact Council.
Excellent.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Brad. Big fun.
Thumbs up. Big fun.
Big fun.